There's a couple of things that I've noticed that are significant about diary writing, writing a book, teaching a subject, or making a video. And the distinction is putting a complex pattern into language. Now, there's a couple of things that are backdrops of this value. And the first one is default mode. There is a default mode, meaning there is a template in the energy field, in the cult, in the culture in which we live, that says that unless we interact in a dynamic way with the pattern, we will default to the majority or to the largest mass or gravitational pull around us. And this is important because the default mode of anything which correlates to the majority mode is never the bleeding edge, meaning it's very energy efficient to copy and do what everyone else is doing, consciously or unconsciously. However, that will never, ever be what is the most efficient, intelligent, excellent way of doing things, because in the bell curve of innovation, the majority is not and has never been optimal. The majority, by definition, is after the bleeding edge, after the early adopters, after the trendsetters. Then you have the majority, by which time there is a new bleeding edge. So the majority has never been correct and will never be correct on the continuum of optimal. But the other thing I think is more important, that we tend to default to living within the play. So we find ourselves in a drama, in a script, and that script is often not of our conscious choosing. Now, in order to go through the process of extricating ourselves from a role in the script, we first must articulate the script. And then we must step outside of the script and see the pattern in its entirety from the outside. And this ties into set theory. Set theory says that you can never fully understand a set from inside the set. And this circle is a great example, because I want you to imagine being inside this pattern. So if you were right here, things would look pretty triangular. If you're a small dot in here, this little pizza slice would look like a huge pizza slice. And in that moment, if you look around, there's nothing else but the pizza slice. You know, this is just this huge triangle, regardless of whether it's three-dimensional, two-dimensional pizza, or a room size. You see a triangle. If you're over here, you see this S-curve in this little space. That's all you see. Now, if you're right up next to this S shape right here, it might seem incredibly novel. It's not until you zoom out that you see it is a repeating fractal pattern, and that the S is, in a certain sense, a mediator between the straight lines here and the larger curve there, that it is a bridge in scale, that its function as a design is in this repeating theme between this shape and this shape, between the curve and the straight line. You don't get to reflect on the subtleties of the design as synergy until you look at it from outside the set, which means that you have to be bigger than the object. See, now it's not hard to be bigger than a circle, but what we're talking about in terms of life and universal patterns are far bigger. We may say, of course, I'm not lost in a circle here, but I feel a bit lost in my life. And one of the biggest reasons that I do vlogging about complex psychological patterns is that the witness is always bigger than what is witnessed. And one cannot fully, in the literalness of life, be bigger than life. Meaning, within the game of life, I am a small part. Because to the extent that I identify with the primary vehicle, with the primary lens for engaging with reality, I'm looking from the physical senses of this body. And this body is very, very small. In relationship to the ecological framework that creates it and in which it exists, that is vast. The multiverse is vastly bigger than the universe, which is vastly bigger than the galaxy, which is vastly bigger than the solar system, which is vastly bigger than the planet, which is vastly bigger than the country, which is vastly bigger than the state, vastly bigger than the town, vastly bigger than my neighborhood, which is still vastly bigger than my house, which is still vastly bigger than me. So I'm this tiny little dot. Now, this tiny little dot through the physical senses can never be bigger than the set of physicality of which it is a part, which means it can never fully understand physicality, which means it can never grasp the patterns within life. Now, in the process of rendering reality on the dimension of language, or in the in the symbology of language, language being a symbol, a symbolic reality, through the meta, through the symbol of reality in language, we can zoom out through imagination, which is only possible through language. Meaning, to be conscious of something, visual, in sound, in sight, in smell, one must put what one is conscious of into language, which is a meta reality that is laid on top of and about the reality. We're not actually conscious of the reality. We're conscious of the symbol of reality, the symbol through which we view reality. So by creating a meta reality, a metaphysical reality, through the lens of language, we can be bigger than the symbol of reality and simulate and create the feelings of being bigger than reality through imagination, through language. And it's a very important thing to grasp, that is, it is impossible to think a thought or to perceive an image without the overlay of language. That we are living in the illusion that is the consciousness of the symbol of reality. And it's a very, very specifically attuned symbol, because what we're seeing is what is attuned to the vibrations of the scientific instruments, of our senses, of our thoughts, of our of our heart. It's a very, very limited scope of perception in a very narrow set of dimensions, in very narrow bandwidths, and that's what we see as real. And yet, because of the fractal nature of reality, because of the fractal and holographic nature of reality, that tiny little slice of reality is and has the capacity to transport our consciousness into a glimpse of the entirety of reality. Within a single grain of sand, the beach and the ocean that creates the millions upon millions of little grains of sand can be inferred. And if oceans exist and beaches exist and water moves, etc., more of the world can be inferred. And if we understand the world, we can start to understand the galaxy and the universe. So because of the holographic nature of reality, if we can step out through language and see the pattern, we get a glimpse of the pattern of the sets of reality of which we are nested in, of which we are a part, that are vastly bigger than who we are, that are too big to grasp. And so what I find, and I spend a lot of time exploring the most constricting aspects of psychology and reality, because the most constricting aspects, trauma, pain, terror, reactivity, the most constricting aspects of reality have a tendency to create a fight, flight, freeze, tailspin, and have a tendency to dominate a large portion of the pattern that we are participants in. Now, they seem, in a certain sense, to be within the drama, highly predictive, highly predeterministic. In the same way that if you're inside the equation that says 2 + 2 = 4, there's really not much other outcome. If you're inside the equation that says that hatred and shame and physical violation and sexual abuse equals, and you have a statistical probability field, there's not a lot of room in that statistical probability field to peel off at a divergent vector that has nothing to do with that probability field. And so the question is, how does one liberate oneself from the predeterministic probability field, from the predeterministic actuality field, and transcend the set? How does one transcend the set? And one of the methods in the symbolic language of words is to capture the pattern in words, 1. 2, to understand the fractal nature of the pattern and our relationship within the pattern. 3, to understand the patterns that create that pattern, to understand the equation by being able to step back. And finally, to understand intuitively or concretely that by relaying the pattern, by recreating the pattern in language, we awaken to the part of us that knows we are bigger than the pattern we have created. The creator, by definition, is always bigger than the pattern. The one who writes down the equation is bigger than the equation. And so as we replicate the creation of the pattern we are in within language, we awaken to other possibilities. By deciding that we are in an equation in which 2 plus 2 equals 4, we move from living in the reality of 4 as the only possibility to understanding that 4 is emerging out of 2 and 2, and understanding that if we are outside of the set of the equation, that we might combine 2 and 3 and get 5. Meaning that the part of us that is outside of the equation can change the variables in infinite ways. So that when we come back into the equation, we have a reality that is 5 rather than a reality as 4. Not because 2 plus 2 ceases to be 4, but because we remember, we awaken to the part of ourselves that is outside the set of the equation, who is writing the script of 2 and 2 and can delete one of the 2's and put 5. Can put 3. 2 plus 3 equals 5. We can start to change the equation. To be the one who changes the equation, we have to be outside of the equation. And one of the best ways to be outside of the equation is to recreate the equation we find ourselves in the metaphysics of language. Because without language, there is no thought. Without thought, there is no consciousness. Without consciousness, there is no us that is bigger than the pattern, than the play, than the poem of which we are a part, the structure of which we are a part. Consciousness is the transcendent force. Consciousness is the part of us that is always bigger than that which it is conscious of. And so it is in consciousness that we can edit the film, that we can look at a variable set that is bigger than the actual reality and begin to concretize a different variable, to condense a different equation.